Sneakers and Cleats, the podcast. Welcome back to the Sneakers and Cleats podcast. This is episode 17. It's Monday, August 21st. High school football and college football starting this week. So it's a big day in sports. I'm Matt Roy, joined by Chuck McGinnick. Chuck, I like Don's suggestion from last time that we're going to come up with the name or thing that number 17 reminds you of. So episode 17, when you think of 17, what do you think of?
I have no idea why Mark Grace of the Chicago Cubs is what pops into my head first. But that's my 17, and I'm going with it.
That's not what I expected you to say.
I don't know why, but Mark Grace, when I see the number 17, I think of him.
Usually it's like John Havlicek, Devontae. I figured Devontae Adams would come out of your mouth.
Devontae Adams is a good one. You're right. That probably is what should have popped into my head.
A little bit less
but
obscure.
For some reason, yeah. Mark Grace. We'll go with that.
So Mike Greenberg just wrote a book recently with his main man, Hembo, and they assign numbers to everybody in sports from 1 to 100. Johnny Havlicek was 17 in the book. I would argue that Shohei Ohtani is becoming a more popular and better 17, and I would think that 17 by the time Shohei retires is going to belong to him.
Shohei is definitely making the number 17 cool, is he not?
Is he? He is. He's making baseball cool too, so that's kind of cool.
It's like Favre with the number 4, right? The number 4 was completely obscure until Favre made it cool.
Well, there's a couple of people who are just synonymous with numbers. It's like John Elway. When I think of 7, I think of John Elway. When I think of 18, which is going to be Wednesday, I think of Peyton Manning. When I think of 4, I think of Brett Favre. I think of certain guys. When you think of 14, who do you think of?
14. First 14 that comes into my head. Jeepers creepers.
Pete Rose is...
Okay, that's a good one.
Is the one that comes to mind for me. I just think of Pete Rose when I think of 14.
I'd probably have to sit and think about that one for a while because nothing is popping into my head for whatever reason.
But then you have infamous ones like 23, Michael Jordan.
No doubt.
I mean, really, really easy ones. So
I think about chromosomes for some reason with 20.
Your mind goes weird places,
It
Chuck.
does.
It's
a vast wasteland, bro.
It's really
this is
odd.
what happens. You're going to crack open a microphone for any amount of time. Some weird things are going to come out.
All right, well, let's get into our rundown today. It's a fun exercise that I like doing at the beginning of this. So good idea from Don there. We got a lot to get to. Full breakdown of the Cowboys preseason game as they continue through the preseason now. Game 2 is over. Some good, some bad, some ugly from that one. Plus, Jerry Jones had some interesting comments regarding why he caved to Zack Martin, which we all figured he would do. And I wanted to get into rookie quarterbacks and why 3 of them are probably going to start week 1. And if Chuck and I think that's good idea, bad idea when it comes to our kind of philosophies there. So immediately, let's get to the Cowboys. They played their second preseason game on Saturday, lost to Seattle, but they lost even more than the score indicated because they had some injuries from that game. The most notable of which were DeMarvion Overshown, the rookie linebacker out of Texas, 3rd-round pick. He's out for the season with the ACL. John Stevens Jr., he's a receiver, converting him to tight end. He was trying to make the team as their 4th tight end behind Jake Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker and Peyton Hendershot. He's out for the season with an ACL tear. Offensive lineman Matt Waletzko, he was kind of the swing tackle. He had a subluxation of his shoulder, so he's going to be kind of banged up a little bit. And then Sheldrick Redwine also had a little bit of an injury. He had a bad hammy. So, Chuck, when we left on Thursday, I asked you what you wanted to see this weekend, and you said health, and here we are.
Yeah, mission not accomplished, right? But this is the problem with having these preseason games. You know, you're going to find out some things about some of the young guys that you hope are end up on your squad at the end of the preseason. The converse of this is what you saw the other night. I mean, to lose decent young dudes like this, I mean, particularly DeMarvion Overshown, and I'm just grateful for moments that you have, getting to do what we get to do. I mean, before these guys even left for camp, I've never met DeMarvion Overshown. Even during OTAs and minicamp, we ended up missing him. But his agents, Jack Scharf and Jeffrey Griffin, are based here in San Antonio. So DeMarvion spent a lot of his off-season going pre-draft, post-draft in San Antonio, working out, getting some business stuff done, doing public appearances, that kind of stuff. And to be able to hang out with DeMarvion Overshown as a guest of the two agents that I just said was a very nice experience for me, just to see what kind of a guy DeMarvion is as a human, not just a football player. We know he's a good player. But I mean, he signed, he was over at the steakhouse over there on I-10 and, took pictures with everybody, and it wasn't stack and rack style. It was, he had human experiences with everybody that was there. In fact, there were some Oiler fans from back in the day. They were my age that were there, and they're like, we hate the Cowboys. We're Oiler fans. We've kind of gravitated towards the Titans. And it's like, well, if I were you, I would go make a human connection with DeMarvion Overshown, because you may hate the Cowboys, but there's no way you can hate this kid as a human. I mean, he's just a great young guy, good worldview, comes from a small town, humble upbringings, but none of that's left him through all of this notoriety and celebrity that he's accrued on his way up the football scale. So, personally, this one hurts a little bit because it was going to be fun to watch him, to see how he developed during his first year, to see the athleticism. I think a lot of people saw that. But, now he's going to be shut down. He's going to have to rehab the whole year. And you could tell, I mean, Mike McCarthy was a little bummed at his press conference after the game the other night. You could tell he kept saying, I just hope these injuries don't overshadow what we saw that was good in the preseason game. And obviously, they were lucky they didn't lose more guys, as it turns out.
I mean, not even overshadow what they saw in the preseason game, but overshadow what they saw from DeMarvion since he was drafted in May. I mean, he has popped off the field every single time that he's been on it. He said it. McCarthy said it himself. He said that it seems like every other day that they were talking about DeMarvion, and that's a big thing to say about a rookie, any rookie, especially a third-round rookie.
Yeah, especially in that room with the linebackers that they've got.
Exactly, and so when you're competing with guys like Micah and Leighton and all these other dudes, and you're the one that they're talking about because of your development and how you're showing out in the preseason and how you're showing out in practice. I remember talking to Zach, and he did a whole couple of features on DeMarvion for us because it seems like he's just popping off the field and popping off the film every time you look at it. And I just hate that happens to him because it's like I was really excited to watch him this year and see exactly what they had in DeMarvion, and now we have to wait a whole nother year.
It's one of those things where, you go to any practice, high school, college, pro, and you may be looking, your eyes may be at some different part of the field or a diamond or wherever you're at, but there's always those guys that somehow you see out of the corner of your eye and you end up thinking to yourself, who is that? Mm-hmm. And he's just one of those guys. He looks different than everybody else that he's around, or most of the guys that he's around.
Yeah, and to put a little bow on DeMarvion, another thing is that it's kind of wearing down on their depth at the linebacking core as well, because I think we know Leighton's not going to play a whole season. He's proven that he doesn't do that. And they're also trying to move him more to a rushing angle, which has been kind of in some of the stories of the preseason, is trying to move him to more of an outside linebacker position and not really that middle linebacker spot. So maybe he's going to have to do that a little less now with DeMarvion out, because it doesn't really give them the flexibility to move Leighton around that much now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they pair this out. I mean, obviously, if you got to keep Leighton healthy and you got to keep 11 healthy, and then you could probably mix and match with some of the other guys that they have. But, again, it's such a long season. You have to be very careful about the number of reps that these guys are getting during the course of the game. I mean, you see what happens even in the preseason.
Yeah, it's just, if there was a spot where they could have lost somebody, I don't think linebacker was it, especially DeMarvion, because he's been coming on so strong. So I just think, like, linebacker, that depth that they have is going to be a question mark all year long. They also lost, like I said, John Stevens, who had a really good first preseason game. He was labeled receiver then. He's being converted to the tight end spot, and now he's out for the season. So it's always sad to see young players that go out when they're trying to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, he's another guy too, right? He looks a little different at the tight end position, but there's that length and size. You just go, he's the tallest guy around. He just looks bigger than everybody else in the huddle, and that's saying something at the NFL level.
Then their offensive line depth, now that Zack Martin's back, it'll help. But Matt Waletzko, I can speak from experience. Shoulder injuries don't go away, especially because this is a separate shoulder. This is the other shoulder that he didn't injure yet. This was his healthy shoulder that is now hurt as well. So when you're having those subluxations, which is basically like your joint popping in and out, it's never good, especially when you're trying to move 350-pound men against their will, and this is your swing tackle spot.
Yeah, those are always tough too because again, we don't know exactly what's going on with the shoulder. I mean, generally speaking, like if you ever dislocate your shoulder, you tear your labrum. So at some point, generally speaking, your labrum is going to need to be cut, and it's reconstruction, no matter how big the tear is in the shoulder. So, it's one of those things you can probably play with, but yeah, if you move it the wrong way or it gets torqued the wrong way, it's probably coming out again and not fun. But, having done that a million times myself, and I finally had to get it cut in my old age, you can do it. It's just, and once it pops back in, if you've ever had that done, it feels great. It feels like you can do anything until you do the one thing that you can't where it comes out again. So, they can kind of harness it down and maybe do some of those other things. And, again, but if it's so bad, if the labrum tear is so bad that it's literally coming out, like say, while you're sleeping, then, obviously there's a point of no return with some of this stuff.
Well, yeah, he'll probably play with a brace on his arm, and it'll hamper his movement a little bit and try and keep it in certain spots where it doesn't go into the wrong ones. So we'll see how that plays out. It was a loss on multiple fronts on Saturday for the Cowboys, but they had some great things as well. Jalen Tolbert's phenomenal, and that's something we didn't say last year almost at all. Jalen Tolbert has come on extremely strong in this preseason. On Saturday, he had 4 catches, 66 yards, including a 35-yarder from Cooper Rush in the first quarter, I believe. He's really showing why he's going to make the team and why they took him in the 3rd round last year.
And I think it gets lost in the translation here. Some of this with Jalen was that, for the longest time, he thought of himself as a baseball player first and then got to football, not late, but, if you're playing other sports, maybe you don't have the corporate knowledge that if you were just the football player, and then you're going to the NFL and all of a sudden those playbooks look like, War and Peace. And there's a lot to digest in that regard. I mean, he just looks like he's playing more free, right? He knows the system. He knows where he's supposed to be. He's thinking less and playing more. And I don't think there's any question that he's made a huge leap between last year to this year.
It's almost like the pressure's off of him because last year was the first one without Amari Cooper, and it's like he was kind of trying to come in and fill that role instead of CD needed to elevate his game, and he did. Then they were like, okay, Michael Gallup's coming off an ACL tear. Maybe too much pressure is being put on Jalen Tolbert right away because he was supposed to be the 2 or the 3. And now it's like, okay, you have Michael Gallup who's fully recovered. You have Brandon Cooks now who's the 2, and you have CD who is the unquestioned number 1 on the team. The pressure seems to be off of Jalen a lot, so where he can just go out and play.
Right, and I think having Brandon Cooks in the room too, I mean, they've all talked about it. I mean, this guy not only came in after he signed his contract, got with the program as quick as he could, he's taken all these younger guys under his wing too and kind of shown them the ropes. Now, obviously, Cooks is a premier talent in the NFL, and I mean, anything that he's willing to share, even if physically they look like 2 different receivers, they're going to be little tricks of the trade that I think are going to pay dividends for not only Jalen, but for the rest of this young receiver core that they've got trying to come up and make the team, be the 5th or 6th receiver.
Yeah, and speaking of this 5th and 6th receiver, Kevontae Turpin's someone that you've been watching pretty closely. What did you see from him on Saturday?
Again, incomplete. You can see the raw ability. You can see the talent. You can see how twitchy he is. You can see what happens when you get him in space. A lot of good things are going to happen if you can get him the ball in space. But is he polished enough to be an NFL receiver at this point? I don't know. I mean, there looks like there's some other guys that maybe aren't as athletic as him that are already on this roster, but we'll see how they end up pairing this out. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions, right, for 5 and 6.
I think that they were trying to make it easier on him to make I think they really want him to make the roster.
I think so too.
And I think they're giving him every opportunity, which might be one of the reasons they moved John Stevens over to tight end, maybe take a little bit more pressure off. And then you have Dennis Houston who's chomping at the bit as well. But I don't know. There's something that he's just not selling himself enough and taking advantage of those opportunities to the fullest extent that he can.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one too, because it's the double-edged sword, right? You have this raw talent and you see the ability that's there, but at some point you are going to run out of opportunities because, if you say that athletically that Turpin is way more athletic than Dennis Houston, but if you're not in the right spots, if you're not catching the ball consistently enough, at some point you may say to yourself, well, okay, maybe this is all Dennis Houston's ever going to be, and he doesn't have the ability that Turpin has. But the bottom line is right now, if we're going and getting ready to go play some games, at some point you've got to have somebody that you're comfortable with putting him on the field.
One thing I think that we know for sure at this point is that the Cowboys running back room is, I wrote down a bad word, but really, really, really good. They are so good. They're freaking awesome. Deuce Vaughn, Rico Dowdle, and Malik Davis, all three of them showed once again that they can run, and any of them can be the number two. I think that Deuce Vaughn has shown that he's going to be that third down back, and they're going to, if they have some creativity in the offensive play calling room and offensive design, they're going to put him in some really, really cool spots. And I think this season we're going to see him in interesting scenarios and situations and different positions on the field, trying to exploit his explosiveness.
I agree 100%. And I think it's kind of cool too. I think fans get to see, this is a prime example that when you're building a roster, even as far back as last year, they know and they've seen things in practice that Rico can do. They saw what Malik Davis was doing at practice and then what he did when he got his limited opportunities during the course of the season. But Rico gets banged up last year. But again, when you're building a roster and you're looking ahead to 2023 while you're in 2022, you're thinking to yourself, okay, if Zeke is making all this money, but we have these other guys that we think we can plug in, I mean, it just becomes an easy situation or an easier situation, I think, for the organization to make. It's like, okay, we can take $10 million off the roster by turning Zeke loose. And now we have these young guys that are very, very functional. And, in some cases, more twitchy, more this, more that. They're younger, less tread on their bodies, or, they're less worn out.
Yeah. Still got some spring in those legs.
Right. And not that Zeke doesn't. It's just when you're building a roster, these are the things you have to weigh. And so as much as Cowboy fans and I would say mostly Cowboy reporters would love to have Zeke around, it's just not possible when you have a salary cap. But it's also good, too. It's like now these guys, Rico, Malik, whoever it may be, Deuce, they get a chance to show that they might be the next Zeke.
Yeah, and Malik had a really good run where it seemed like he was carrying two guys in the first half, and then Rico scored it on a touchdown on that little pick play out of the backfield. And then Deuce Vaughn's touchdown over on Saturday was just Deuce Vaughn-esque. He jukes one guy and then spins around another, gets into the end zone on a 14-yard scamper. But the thing that I just thought of and is going to be interesting is which one's not going to make the roster. Because you still have Rojo, you have Tony Pollard, that's 2. Malik Davis, Rico Dowdle, Deuce Vaughn, that's 5. There's no way they go in with 5 running backs on their roster. So which one doesn't make it?
Well, I think it's going to be tough for Rojo at this point, right? Because he's already facing a suspension early on in the season, so he's not going to help you. I think was it 2 games?
2 games,
that he
yeah.
got?
So they don't have to make this decision really until week 3, but still.
Right, and then a lot can happen. Obviously, we saw what happened in the preseason game on Saturday night. Any one of these guys could go down at any time, and usually these things have a way of sorting themselves out or itself out, whatever it is.
Right.
By the time you get to either the regular season or, even through the preseason. So there's numbers right now, but you're right. They don't have to be pressed to make a decision just yet.
Because I think if you put any of those 3 guys, Rico, Deuce, or Malik Davis on the practice squad, I think they get snapped up pretty quickly, especially Deuce. So it'll be kind of interesting to see who makes the team and who's on it for the long haul. But I think that second running back spot that's probably the biggest position battle that they have in camp right now.
It very well could be. I mean, I think, based on what I've seen so far, it looks like Rico's the guy at this point. I think he could have been the guy maybe even last year, to some degree to be getting those third string reps. So, but he got hurt. you just like that guy in space too, right? You
Yeah.
feel like something good is going to happen when that guy has maybe one guy around him, or even if a guy's trying to flank him.
I keep going back to what Jerry said in that one-on-one with Zach when he's just like, this team's got speed. God, damn right they do. They are
Right.
fast, man. They are fast. They're explosive. They're twitchy at every position on the field, especially the skill positions. So it's going to be cool to see how they use everybody. But overall, I wasn't huge on the way that the special teams went. They had that safety at the end of the game, kind of took him out of contention. That was Rico letting his guy through the personal protector, and then he tried to get it, ran out of the end zone. But so the special teams have been unimpressive so far. Brandon Aubrey made all of his kicks, I believe, on Saturday, so that's good. It's 1 week out of the crossfire for him, so congratulations to Brandon Aubrey on making his kicks. So, yeah, that's what we got on the Saturday game. Let's get to what Jerry said on Zack Martin. So Jerry, before the game on Saturday, had an interesting quote. He was being asked by reporters about why he caved to Zack Martin. This is what he said. He said, quote, "He's indispensable. We had to have him on the field. He never in any way gave any indication to me that he was not going to be on the field. We felt the way he felt, and he obviously felt the way we felt, whatever that means. That's why he's here." And then he went on to say, "I feel good about this team. It had everything to do with what we did with Zach. I do feel strong about this team. I didn't feel like we needed to have a hiccup there. That influenced me a lot. I think the most important thing is I like where the whole team is emotionally, expectation-wise. I think Mike and the coaches have done a great job. We didn't need to have any downers." So when you hear that, Chuck, what do you think of?
Well, the two lines that stand out to me are, I didn't feel like we needed to have a hiccup there. And the next one is, we didn't need to have any downers, right? And I guess from the 40,000-foot view, that's probably the best way of looking at this, and probably why Jerry ended up falling on the sword in this particular case. Because if he does really feel good about this team, if the coaching staff feels good about the team, if this team feels good about itself going into the season and where they are physically, mentally, the scheme, all that stuff, to have a distraction with one of your best players potentially not being there, or get to the point where there's a point of no return where they have to trade him, any of those things, I don't think, based on what Jerry said, that he wanted to tempt fate. We have these things in place. Let's go ahead and do something that maybe necessarily we don't want to do, because he also said in the same sentences that the money that they had allocated for CD and Micah is now going to be a lot harder to get those deals done because of money that they've allocated for Zach in the next couple of years. So they did have to sacrifice in some way, shape, or form. And I just wonder at some point if somebody like CD or Micah, if it comes to it, probably more CD because he's up first. If this all of a sudden is not, just a problem that you're kicking down the road.
I don't think it's going to affect those two guys, really. I think they're going to get what they get, and it's probably going to affect some guy lower on the roster, like a Rojo or, a third tight end or something that they need to get that $4 million back from. But what really stood out to me is that he said once again, and he has been he's said it throughout the offseason, that he feels really good about this team. I would argue that this is probably their best chance to make the Super Bowl in 28 years since they've been to their last one. I think that this is probably the best team they've had since 1995, and Jerry is more or less saying, we're pulling out all the stops. We're going to push all our chips to the middle of the table. I won't be surprised if they make a big trade before the trade deadline if someone does get injured. I think that they think this is their best opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to put in terms for me going all the way back to the last Super Bowl, because they've had some good teams. And I mean, they've had it set up for themselves pretty nicely too. I mean, the 07 team had home field, and then,
Was that the Tony Romo fumble year?
No, that was the year that they played the Giants, and then the Giants went on the run and won the Super Bowl.
Right.
And again, hats off to the Giants that year for doing what they did to win all those games on the road, and then to knock off the Patriots, who hadn't lost a game. And then, that year they lost to the Packers. That was another really good team where you're thinking, man, this is a team that believes in itself. It's really, really good. And once you get to the tournament, you never know. But then there's the Aaron Rodgers throw to Cook on 3rd and forever, and time winding down, and it's the perfect throw with a perfect route. on the sideline and then the last second field goal. I mean, I don't know that this team is as good as those other two. I guess we're going to find out. It's, I think, easy to sit here and say that they are based on what they have right now. But again, it's this whole march through the regular season. Is what you start off with is not what you're going to end up looking like at the end of the season. It's hard for me to make that leap as we sit here in late August.
What they are to us is obviously different and up for debate. What they are to Jerry is very apparent, because Jerry, in his actions and in his words, has said and shown that he thinks this is their best team. He thinks this is a Super Bowl contender, and he thinks they're going to knock off the Eagles because, in his defense, the NFC can be had. The AFC is a cluster. Like, who knows? I mean, put the Chiefs at the top in pencil and see what else plays out. But the NFC is wide open. Is Brock Purdy gonna play well for the Niners? I don't know. Is Sam Darnold or Trey Lance gonna play for the Niners? I don't know. Is Geno gonna have a decent season? Is Jalen Hurts gonna duplicate what he did last year? I have no idea. Aaron Rodgers now in the AFC. The Packers are the Lions gonna win that division? I don't know.
Right, they got a chance. The whole division is
the Cowboys.
That whole Central Division is, or the North Division is, I think, completely in flux. And I think you've seen teams like the Vikings kind of pivot based on what you've said.
That's the point. Like, the Cowboys see this NFC and they see, okay, the Eagles are good. Who else? Why can't it be them? And I think that's what Jerry is seeing.
Yeah, well said.
And the fact that he didn't want Zach to be a distraction is like, okay, we might have, cut off our pinky to save the hand here. But I don't know. It's everything that they've shown is showing us that, and showing me at least, that they think that there's huge expectations for this team this year.
Putting all their chips on the table. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I just hope that they have aces and not twos.
Right.
So let's get to one other topic today that I wanted to discuss, because I just think it's an endlessly fascinating one. You've seen over the last 10 years or so rookie starters coming in and starting right away, rookie players, especially quarterbacks. This year you have Bryce Young, who got taken 1, CJ Stroud at 2 to the Texans, and 4 was Anthony Richardson to the Colts, all 3 of which lining up to be the starters. Anthony Richardson already named, Bryce Young already named, CJ Stroud hasn't been named yet, but pretty sure that's coming. CJ Stroud obviously more on our radar since the Texans down here in Texas. But I don't really know what I think about that, because I think it's a case-by-case basis, but overall, I usually tend to believe that starting rookies game 1 at the quarterback position is a bad idea.
It sure seems like it on a lot of levels, right? I mean, especially when you're talking about these franchises that have older players and families, and there's so much money riding on the line, and billion-dollar corporations. You're basically handing the car keys to a kid to go say, okay, let's see what we got. I guess it's a case-by-case basis with me, Matt. I think there was a lot of wisdom early on with how the Packers brought Aaron Rodgers along, and it was year 4 where they finally said, okay, now it's time to go. I mean, some of these guys, it takes a while there's a lot to learn. And
look at Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
He sat behind Alex Smith, and now he's probably the best quarterback that's ever lived, the most talented quarterback that's ever lived.
And then there's the other side of it, which is, you're going to build up some calluses when you're getting your brains knocked out and you're seeing things for the first time. And, the more you see those things, the better you're going to react. Hopefully you live to tell about it. But, like CJ Stroud, at least he's got the frame, it looks like, to absorb some of the things that he's going to be seeing for the first time. I think the hard part is, at the pro level especially, is that a lot of what made these guys great in college is that, they can also tuck it and go, and they're really good at RPOs, and they're really good at making the defense think that they might be able to take off and run with the ball too, which obviously opens up the passing game for them later on. But at the pro level, because everybody's big, everybody's fast, everybody's the same size, they're big and bigger, these guys, they're going to get hurt a lot more often if you run nothing but, or tailor your offense to be mostly RPO-styled offense. So you got to be judicious with it. But I think, if you look at a team like the Eagles and how they run their offense with a young quarterback, they've kind of tailored everything and they've made the game smaller, so to speak. You're playing small ball. It's balls not going way downfield and you're not stretching the field or doing any of that. You've just got guys that you're maneuvering in space and you're tailoring it because he's not the strongest arm guy in the league, but there are some things that he does well. And so they're taking advantage of it, and they've got a really good defense too, and they're good up front.
But even then, it's a young quarterback who got hurt right before the Super Bowl last year.
Yeah.
So when I think about it, it is a case by case basis. And just taking this year as an example, Bryce Young is going to get killed, in my opinion. He's 5'10" and 200 pounds, and if you start him week 1 without him knowing exactly where to go with the ball and exactly what to do, he's going to hold it for 1 second too long, and TJ Watt is going to kill him. So I hope that doesn't happen. CJ Stroud is probably the most NFL ready, and I hate that expression, NFL ready,
Right.
Because none of them are ready.
Right.
But CJ Stroud probably has the best chance. He has the best O-line, that's for sure. Even the Titus Howard just got hurt. And then Anthony Richardson, the book on him coming out was that he was the most unready, and he's going to start week 1. And so I'm afraid that he's going to end up turning into like a Cam Newton where he's just a wrecking ball as a quarterback and doesn't end up developing as a passer, and he's out of the league in 6 years, which would really suck because he's probably the most talented quarterback since Patrick Mahomes came in.
It's always a slippery slope, right? I mean, the coaches know what they have. The problem is you don't know with some of these teams if you're getting pressure from ownership to start the rookie, if it's a 50-50 split between, let's say, Davis has got more corporate knowledge, obviously, with 1 year under his belt than the young quarterback has, but he doesn't have the skill set. I don't know how you pair this at this point. I mean, I think the Texans should be very excited that their young receivers look pretty good.
Yeah.
And they got to figure out a way to get that offensive line healthy because they've been nicked up a little too up front. And that's another thing that scares you about a young quarterback is they've had their fair share of injuries now up front during this training camp. So there's a lot of moving parts of the Texans. They got a lot of questions to answer before we answer the bell for week 1.
Tell you what, Tank Dell is phenomenal. That young Houston receiver out of Houston is wonderful. He is incredible.
Yep. You got Mechie coming back too from
They could make
cancer.
a leap. They can make a little leap. I don't know, but I mean, their division's there to be had too. With that, besides the Jags, but the Jags slip up a little bit. They started slow last year. They could do it. Who knows? That's what we got for this week. But very excited to tell you that on Wednesday, when Chuck and I return, not Thursday this week, it'll be Wednesday. We'll have our first high school athletics episode of the season. It's very, very exciting. So every Wednesday from now until the end of the school year, we'll be dropping an episode previewing the week's biggest games, highlighting local athletes. So for the next 10 weeks, at least, it's going to be football. Or actually, probably the next 15 weeks, it's going to be football. But we're also going to be previewing our Thursday Night Lights game of the week, which this week is Harlandale versus Vet Memorial, which is very exciting because we're going to have a generational running back prospect on our airwaves. So that'll be fun. And James Peoples. So we'll have that on Wednesday. We'll have interviews with all the coaches. We'll have interviews with Peoples and a couple of the players as well. Jack actually went and got those all today for me. So I'm going to listen to those, cut those up and everything. But Chuck, very exciting getting some high school football going on now.
It is. I enjoyed talking with the Veterans Memorial coach today, and it started to feel like Monday of game week, right?
Right.
You go through the usual routine of picking up the phone and starting to make some phone calls to get some intel as to what you think you might be seeing on Thursday night. It's kind of cool, too, because this is like, for these coaches, too, they get to see what they finally have. All these weeks of working out and trying to build a team together or bring a team together, and then some of the young guys that you had last year that made a leap, what are they going to do their senior year? Just a fascinating time of year. It's always fun to roll these games out and see what we got.
Absolutely. And just for a little bit of context on why we're doing it on Wednesdays, because we have TNL, which is a Thursday Night Lights game, we're doing high school episodes on Wednesdays. I know we have some national listeners. I think we have some listeners from France and all that stuff. So San Antonio high school sports might not interest you, but when we came up with the idea for this podcast in general, I wanted to do one and make sure that we're entirely divulging and getting into the community as much as possible, because there's really no way to, one, grow the podcast and grow our department and stuff, but two, three, become more like entrenched in our own community and in our back door, and know the kids that we're covering and know the coaches that we're covering and know everybody that's going on, then being able to talk about them once a week and having a community, one, invest in us and us invest in them. So I feel like it was almost our responsibility to do that at least once a week.
The older I get, Zach, the more I understand that there are great stories everywhere, right? There's stories at the NFL level, of course, but there's also great stories at the high school level. I mean, you mentioned James Peoples. That's just one of many. You know, there's going to be the next dude that's coming along. We got a lot of underclassmen that are of that ilk, where they are, as you said, generational, where, you know, they're dudes, and then they're dudes that you don't see but every 9 or 10 years or so. And there's a lot of those guys. And you're right, that's part of our job, right? To illuminate some of this stuff that's going on, and obviously to catch a rising star. You know, you don't want to be the guy that's talking about Zeke Elliott when he was in your own backyard after he's already scoring 50 touchdowns a year for the Dallas Cowboys. You want to be doing it now so that, you know, down the line you could say, yeah, we've been, you know, when Ohio State calls and said, hey, do you got any video of this kid when he was playing in high school because we're doing this big piece? It's like, yeah, we were on that then. You don't want to go, oh no, we missed that. How do you miss that stuff? You don't, unless you got your eyes closed. So that's another benefit to doing this, is that it opens our eyes, or it takes our eyes to places that I think a lot of people don't know that we go.
Absolutely. And so from now, like I said, from every Wednesday from now until the end of the school year, we'll be highlighting football first, and then we'll go to some other sports, basketball. We got baseball. We got all kinds of sports here in Texas, you know, but football is obviously the driver for very obvious reasons. So I'm very excited to do that on Wednesday, and you'll get that every week. If you don't want to listen to that one, don't have to tune into it. You'll be able to see, I'll put high school preview on the front of it, so you'll be able to see exactly what's in the episode. So don't worry about that. Anyway, quick reminder, you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. YouTube version will have some video elements, especially on that Wednesday episode. You'll be able to see practice film and all that stuff of those teams, so that's always fun. Please download, subscribe, rate, review, unsubscribe, resubscribe, re-rate, re-review. Give us a 5-star rating and some feedback. Feedback is a gift. I think that's the first time I've done that and not messed up, so that's good. Go me. It only took 17 episodes. We'll see you right back here on Wednesday in the Sneakers and Cleats podcast.